So first of all, let me express my gratitude for the organizers that I was invited and I'm now able to present my newest research. This research is dedicated to the regional differences in medieval Hungary. This is a large-scale research and it started in the last year. The database is currently being finalized. The regional differences will be analyzed from a range of perspectives, from economic history to legal, ecclesiastical, and cultural aspects. In this project, I was invited to collect information on architecture monuments from around 1500. The data collection covers monuments from 1470 to 1530, and it includes more than 700 churches. The material represents a borderline situation in several respects. First and foremost, the medieval kingdom of Hungary was inherently in a cultural border position, as it was situated on the border between Western and Eastern Christianity. Although the country's population was predominantly Latin Christian in the Middle Ages, the Orthodox religion was also present from the time of the adoption of Christianity. As we shall see later, this began to change significantly around 1500. Moreover, not only geographically, but also chronologically, we can speak of a borderline situation. In terms of art history, the last decades of the 15th century are a turning point in Europe in several aspects. The latest phase of Gothic art was then spreading in various forms in different countries. In Hungary, influences came mainly from German areas. The last major handbook on Hungarian Gothic art ends with 1470, but Szilárd Pap discussed the late Gothic variants that were gaining ground at this time among the Hungarian royal court. At the same time, the Renaissance spread in many European countries, and Hungary and the court of King Matthias Corvinus played a pioneering role in this. This is well known in international research, but in recent decades, it has been reassessed thanks to Árpád Mikó. A specific scoring system was used in the development of the database. The database indicates, in addition to the geographical data, whether a completely new church has been built, or only new parts of a building have been constructed, or only parts of a building have been remodeled. Extra score is awarded if exceptionally high quality details have been used, for example, late Gothic sacrament houses, especially if they are in Renaissance style. We have also considered the dimensions, settling for external lengths. We have also taken this as a basis if the whole building was not built at the same time, but only the chancel was extended, as in the case of the Royal Coronation Basilica in Székesfehérvár, or if the rebuilding did not involve any major extension, but the superstructure was modernized. The data series are still being evaluated, and it is already clear that the development indicators in the different areas are converging. The architecture aspect has been raised by taking the number of constructions around 1500, whether new, extended, or just rebuilt, but excluding uncertain cases. By applying the scoring system outlined above, based on building parts, projecting details, and scale data, this gives a score for a given county. The highest score was given to the southern Transylvania region of Saxony, followed closely by the neighboring Transylvanian secular region of Udvarhelyszék, but well behind. However, it should be noted that the Saxon region was one of the largest territorial units in medieval Hungary, while the center of the kingdom, Pilis County, was one of the smallest, but obviously the most developed. Therefore, the data were averaged according to the size of the area, and the final score was obtained. And, as expected, the capital and its surroundings, Buda and Pilis County, came out on top. However, the southern part of Saxony and the neighboring areas continue to stand out. The upper middle field is made up of regions that are both economically developed and better preserved, the western counties of the medieval Kingdom of Hungary, the mining towns, and the regions of Satu Mare and its surroundings. The counties with the lowest score are the large counties in the Hungarian Great Plain, especially in the southern part of the region. This data collection took into account architecture and archaeologically datable monuments. For some regions, however, there have been studies which have been reconstructed the entire ecclesiastical topography of the era, including churches known only from written sources. As these cannot usually be dated precisely, they are not included in the present database. Fortunately, in the last decade, such a database has been published for the southern countries of Transdanubia and for 3 countries of the Hungarian Great Plain. As we look at this data, we find that the preserved architecture monuments of the former churches are less than a third, even in the better-known Pest country, with the other areas typically around 15%. Even of this significantly low number of medieval churches, only a fraction were built or remodeled around 1500. The figures ranges from 8 to 22%, but if we include the uncertain remains, we obtain a figure around 30 or 40%. Under these circumstances, it is very difficult to judge whether the extremely low scores of the southern part of the Hungarian Great Plain can be explained by the high degree of destruction of monuments by the fact that around 1500, this region was already in a state of severe crisis. Around 1500, there were already signs of another major political change. The Ottoman Empire appeared on the southern borders of the medieval Hungarian Kingdom and expanded dynamically in the Balkans. By around 1500, states has been previously perceived an imminent threat. Hungary's southern borders became frequent incursions. A few decades later, this led to the dissolution of the medieval Hungarian Kingdom, and the southern part of the Great Plain under the study came under the direct Ottoman rule. Only the western and northern regions resisted the Turkish advance, while the Principality of Transylvania became a vassal of the Ottoman Empire. This is also led to significant ethnic and religious restructuring. The historical boundary that has spread Latin and Orthodox Christianity during the Middle Ages was moved further to the north. From the Balkans, the Serbian Orthodox population moved into the still safer Hungarian Great Plain. The Church of Ráckeve, near present-day Budapest, is a striking reminder of this. The Serbs who moved here in the mid-15th century were granted privileges by King Matthias Corvinus, and by 1487 had built their own church. In addition to the purely late Gothic church, a tower was built in the early 16th century and remodeled later, and the southern side chapels may be contemporary with it. The interior of the church, which is Western in terms of architecture, Gothic, but it is decorated with Byzantine-style wall paintings and iconography. These date from the 18th century in its present form, but has late medieval predecessors. The Church of Ráckeve is exceptionally well-preserved example of the architecture of the Orthodox population moving to Hungary. In the southern border region, it is much more difficult to identify architectural monuments. These were summarized by Miklós Szakács in his book published 3 years ago. Based on tradition and written sources, 24 Serbian Orthodox monasteries in this area have been found to be of medieval origin. The research is complicated by the fact that there are almost no authentic written sources from the Middle Ages, and both Serbian and Romanian literature have their own incompatible traditions regarding the history of these, though partially Romanian monasteries. I would like to illustrate the situation with 2 examples. According to the Serbian Orthodox tradition, Saint Sava founded a Byzantine Rite monastery in the 13th century in the village of Bazias, now part of Romania. Historically, however, it can only be confirmed that it was supported by the Serbian despot George or George Branković and his brother Jovan or John in the late 15th century. The monastery was destroyed by the Turkish invasion of 1738, after which the present church was built. In 1848, the monks of Zlatica moved here, and in 1855, they renewed the church. The monastery was damaged again in 1945, then became deserted in 1955 in the Yugoslavian period, and was restored only in 1980. The present church has no details that can be considered clearly medieval. Without archaeological and architectural research, it is not possible to determine whether there are parts of the church that really date from the Middle Ages. The situation is even more complicated in Kušići, or Kušić, a few kilometers away. This is situated next to the Nera river, which forms the Romanian-Serbian border today. The village, now called Kušić, belongs to Serbia, while the monastery on the left bank of the river, called Kušići, belongs to the nearby Romanian municipality of Zlatica, which also had an Orthodox monastery. The monastery of Kušići, dedicated to St. Nicholas, was first mentioned only in 1556, when it was inhabited by only 2 monks. According to a record from 1757, the monastery had a new church. Serbian research, based on a source from the late 18th century, attribute Kušići, like Bazijaš, to Jovan Branković. However, an excavation in 1991 revealed the predecessors of the present building. The nave of the church, with a narthex, had a semicircular apse to the north and south, and an extended semicircular sanctuary to the east. The new church, which still stands today, was built on these earlier foundations in the mid-18th century. Dumitru Tejku dated the medieval church to around 1400, before the Branković, the Serbian family, owned it. The dating is based on 14th, 15th century pottery found on the site, but it does not directly date the construction of the church. It could therefore have been built at any time in the 15th century, possibly even later. It is highly probable that some of the monasteries in question were originally built of wood and are therefore difficult to capture archaeologically. Hence, out of the 24 monasteries in question, I have only been able to include 3 in the database, which certainly distorts the overall picture. The fact that the other point of the dataset, the most intensive church building activity, also lies close to the southern border of the medieval Hungarian Kingdom, may also be related to the threat posed by the Ottoman Empire. During the 15th century, the Saxon and Székely settlements surrounded their churches with walls, creating the forest churches so characteristic to Transylvania. The fact that the church was walled is not in itself sufficient reason to include it into the database. It also requires evidence of further constructions on the church. A significant number of the churches of the Saxon settlements were 3-eyed late Romanesque basilicas built in the 13th century. In at least 11 cases, the eyes were demolished during the 15th century, and the church was converted into a fortress. It is easy to understand how the lower eyes could have been a weak point in the defense during a possible siege. By dismantling them and enclosing the arcades, the nave was surrounded by highly enclosing walls. In many cases, the chancel was also raised, including pitch openings, and the nave buttresses were connected by arches, and in this way, this also strengthening the defense system. Most of the Saxon churches were thus transformed into fortresses. From an art historical point of view, the vaulting of the church had more spectacular consequences. As a rule, simple clay ribs were used to support the star vault or a mixed net vault. The vault was mainly used to provide effective protection against fire, but also to decorate the church with a spectacular design, as in the case of the church of Bodendorf or Salzbuda, which dates from around 1500. The church in Valea Villor or Wurmloch or Nagybaromnak in Hungarian was originally built as a single nave church in the 14th century, and around 1500 it was also walled in and its tower and chancel were raised. At the same time, the chancel and the nave of the church were vaulted. The aesthetic value of the rebuilding is also demonstrated by the new, richly decorated sacrament niche that was added when the chancel was rebuilt. The former medieval furnishing of the chancel still survive, including the stalls dated 1526, which testifies the popularity of the Renaissance style in this region. Bunesti, Százbuda, and Valávilla Nagybaromlak are two well-preserved examples of the dozens of medium-sized Saxon churches. The highlight is the world-famous Berethalom church, which, after a 13th century first construction, was completely rebuilt in the first quarter of the 16th century. The three-eyed whole church was covered with a net vaulting, the payment for which was arranged in 1521. The completion of the construction is marked by the western portal, dated 1524, with its multi-layered structure typical of late Gothic Hungary. The side gates, however, are Renaissance in style. The church in Berethalom is just one example of the Transylvanian fortified churches that have become a distinctive architectural feature of the landscape in the southern Transylvania region. In recognition of this, in 1993, the fortified churches of 7 municipalities were inscribed in the UNESCO World Heritage List. It seems that in this case, the geographical and chronological boundaries that characterized Hungary around 1500 have created a very special value, which was survived to this day, despite the vicissitudes of history. After the majority of Transylvanian Saxons left their homeland in 1990s, these churches were endangered. Today, there are both good and frightening examples. It is also the responsibility of our generation to ensure that the good examples prevail. Thank you for your attention.